Support for Swan Song is brought to you by viewers like you. Thank you. If you're starting to think that Bandai is putting a bit too many Digimon games out on the WonderSwan in such a short time span, then you'd be right. This episode's game is Digimon Adventure 02 Tag Tamers, and it's the first obvious artifact that demonstrates Bandai's aggressive milking of the Digimon franchise. It was developed by Sims, published by Bandai, and released on August 3rd, 2000. The last Digimon game we looked at was Digital Partner, emerging around the start of the Digimon Adventure 02 anime, and released alongside Pocket Digimon World for the PlayStation. It was much less of a traditional game and much more a piece of software making up a part of the complex chain enabling data to be exchanged between Bandai's Digivice toys and Pocket Digimon World. Tag Tamers was released on the same week as the release of episode 18 of Digimon Adventure 02, but far more important to Tag Tamers is the release of the second Digimon movie, Our War Game, in March of 2000. Tag Tamers actually opens with both Ken and WonderSwan series protagonist Akiyama Ryo watching the Diablomon fight from the end of the movie together. Shortly thereafter, what appears to be a clone of Diablomon appears in the digital world, and Vmon reaches out to Ken and Ryo via Ken's computer to get them to come back to the digital world. As Ryo, you go into the dungeon and defeat that clone, only to fall into Millenniumon's trap, which strands Ryo, Vmon, Piccolomon, and the freshly petrified Taichi and Agumon in a parallel universe. The name Tag Tamers comes from the gameplay, which switches back and forth between the two protagonists of the game, Ryo in one dimension, and Ken, accompanied by his partner Digimon Wormmon, in the other. Tag Tamers is the successor to the last true Digimon games released on the WonderSwan at its time of release, Anode and Cathode Tamer. As you may remember, these two games were turn-based strategy RPGs where Digimon waged battles on grid-based maps. Despite reusing a lot of assets from that game, this is not ultimately what Tag Tamers is. If I was being extremely charitable, I would call Tag Tamers a turn-based dungeon crawling RPG with 3 vs 3 Digimon battles. Let me start with the Digimon battles, as these are the least contentious aspect. Whether you enter combat via a random battle in the overworld or are actively fighting the floor encounter in a dungeon, you'll be taken to a battle screen very reminiscent of the maps from Anode and Cathode Tamer, except they're a single screener and there's no more grid-based movement or anything. You can have up to 3 Digimon fight on your side, and there may be up to 3 enemy Digimon as well. Much like Final Fantasy II, Tag Tamers does not have a traditional leveling up system, but instead evolves your Digimon stats over time based on their gameplay actions. Using 3 techniques which use DP, for example, will cause your Digimon's energy stat to go up, and likewise for the offensive, defensive, speed, and health stats with their respective game actions. One of the things FF2 was most known for was the strategy of hitting your own characters to force their health to go up, and this issue is avoided in Tag Tamers by instead attaching the health rank ups to winning 3 battles. Okay, there's no point in dodging it anymore, let's talk about the dungeon. The gameplay loop in Tag Tamers largely consists of going to a dungeon, fighting through a combat encounter on each floor, and then by completing the dungeon you will either unlock a new dungeon, training facilities, or a new region of the overworld to explore. On paper, you can make the case that this meets the minimum definition of a dungeon-crawling role-playing game. The problem is that the dungeons are literally just a single combat encounter on every floor, followed by a short one-screen room which may occasionally contain a chest, a shop, or an NPC, and the obligatory stairs to go to the next floor. These look exactly the same for the entire length of the game, and aside from the floor tiles, so do the battles. These restrooms between battles feel like a contractual obligation, like the game wouldn't pass certification if they didn't at least give you the minimum viable room to heal and save the game between battles. It feels like a mobile game that thought dungeon exploration was a superfluous mechanic that needed to be optimized away in the name of player efficiency. For all the shit Final Fantasy XIII gets for being a hallway simulator, it sure has a lot of beautiful hallways to take in while you're playing it. Tag Tamers has some pretty good overworld tile sets, but they just throw all of that into the trash when you're in a dungeon, and no single dungeon has any personality or coherent aesthetic at all. Digimon can evolve in 3 distinct ways throughout Tag Tamers. There are natural evolutions, which occur as your Digimon's experience points increase. There are Jogress evolutions, which allow two parent Digimon to combine to form a stronger child Digimon. Jogress also allows moves to be passed down generationally, allowing players to work toward curated movesets. Armor evolution is also available, provided you find the appropriate Digimental in dungeons. We're only halfway through the Akiyamario quadrilogy, but you can already tell by playing this game that there's something fundamentally broken with Bandai's approach to releasing Digimon games on the WonderSwan. Anode and Cathode Tamer, Tag Tamers, and the next game, D1 Tamers, were all released within the span of a year between December of 1999 and 2000. And all of these games are meant to be narrative-driven role-playing games developed by the same team. How much development time did each of these games get? Whatever the answer is, it clearly wasn't enough. Asset reuse isn't a sin in itself. Everyone loves the Yakuza games, which are still reusing animations dating back to the PS2 days, or the Igavania games and the Monster Hunter games prior to World, which build atop a massive asset library from past games while simultaneously introducing a boatload of new assets for the next game in the series to build off of. At the end of the day, as long as you're making a good game that feels distinct from the rest of the series, and especially if you're bringing as much new content as you are borrowing from past titles, you can get away with asset reuse just fine. What is Elden Ring if not a From Software theme park made from their PS3 and PS4 era asset library? But the asset reuse in Tag Tamers doesn't pass the sniff test. It feels like asset reuse out of desperation. It feels like they wouldn't have been able to scrap together a game at all if they hadn't been able to import the sprite sheet from Anode and Cathode Tamer wholesale. I have a lot more I want to say about this, but I have to save some of the story for the eventual D1 Tamers episode, so I'm just going to hold the brakes here. This is purely speculation on my part, but I think Bandai considered video games to just be another toy in their release schedule, and they didn't put any thought into what the development time of any of these games should be for a minimum quality bar to be met. You don't scrap together a narrative-based RPG in 4 to 6 months, that's crazy. And yet here they were asking Sims to pump out 3 of them in a single year, with a genre pivot right in the middle for good measure. Naturally, people invested in the narrative of the Akiyamario quadrilogy will want to follow along and find out what's up. Luckily for them, this game has an English fan translation. It's also going to resonate with people who are really into the Jogress evolution mechanic and want to experiment with what movesets they can come up with for their Digimon. But for everyone else, unfortunately, Tag Tamers stands out as one of the rare examples so far of a licensed anime game on the WonderSwan that does live up to the stereotype of cash grab licensed anime games.